Welcome to our Azure Incident Retrospective. I'm David Steele.
I'm Sami Kuba. We work in the Azure Communications team.
In addition to providing a written post-incident review after major outages, we also now host these retrospective conversations.
You're about to watch a recording of a live stream where we invited impacted customers through Azure Service Health to join our panel of experts in a live Q&A.
We had a conversation about reliability as a shared responsibility. So this includes our learnings at Microsoft, as well as guidance for customers and partners to be more resilient.
We hope you enjoy the conversation that follows. Super, yeah. So today's focus incident, we're going to be looking at an Azure Notification Hubs outage that occurred in East US. We wrote down that this was an operator error, that when we decommissioned a new instance instead of the old instance, the impact happened on the 3rd of June and lasted for about 15 hours. And so during this time, if customers were using Azure Notification Hubs in East US, they'd be unable to send push notifications, things like breaking news updates, flight cancellations, special deals for shoppers for their customers. So all of these things happened in the East US outage.
Right, we're going to discuss all of our learnings at Microsoft to help prevent issues like this, as well as learnings for customers and partners to kind of de-risk outages like this one. So to talk us through the incident and its impacts, I'd like to introduce the engineering leaders joining us as our guests on our panel today. In person here from our Redmond studio, we've got Gaurav Khanna, who's our partner group engineering manager from the Service Fabric team. On the end, we've got Jitendra Kochar, who's our principal engineering manager, also from the Service Fabric team. And then finally, joining us virtually is Pranav Gupta, an engineering manager from the Azure Notifications Hub service. And since Sami's just been mentioning in the introduction, Pranav, this was a Notifications Hub outage, so maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, and Pranav, before we get into the incident itself and speaking about the outage, could you talk to us about how Azure Notification Hub usually performs updates? And in particular, if you could add some context around where we have automation versus where we use human beings.
Sure. Thank you, Sami, and thanks, David, for that introduction. So before I go into that, I'll just quickly tell what Azure Notification Hubs is. It's a scalable push notification service that enables users to send targeted messages to millions of mobile devices across platforms like iOS, Windows, Android, and many, many more. It supports personalized notifications using tags and templates, allowing rich localized content delivery. Now, some of the portion is automated. Majority of the deployments happen in an automated fashion, where from deploying the code all till the end, it happens in an automated fashion. During some period, for example, the rare off cases, we do need an infrastructure upgrade, such as for security or certain other circumstances. In those cases, operator is involved who helps us in making the decommissioning of the older instance and commissioning of the newer one. So in such cases, in rare instances, this is required.
Got it. That's a really good overview, so we understand now what Notifications Hub does and generally speaking, how we apply these kinds of updates. So let's fast forward to the incident itself. Let's fast forward to the 3rd of June. What did customer impact feel like for Notification Hub's customers who happen to be using the East US region?
On June 3rd, we had a significant outage in our East US region where customers could not register new devices. Neither they could send the notifications on their existing devices. Though the services were still healthy in the other regions, but for the impacted users, it meant the disruption to their mobile push workflows. The customers were not able to send out real-time notifications. People might be getting stuck somewhere where they were supposed to receive some notifications and they were not able to do that. There were logistic updates which were missing. And there were some time-sensitive communications which had to go out. So the customer impact was real, and customers did face a lot of challenges in getting what they were supposed to in near real-time scenarios. So we did feel that pain.
That's super tough for customers, particularly if their business depends on like real-time updates to these millions of devices. In the PIR, we spoke about it was the decommissioning event which caused the hiccup. Could you provide some context about what it was in this decommissioning event that caused that hiccup?
Got it. The root trigger was a deployment which was aimed at enhancing the security for ANH. It was a standard procedure, and as part of a standard procedure, we deploy a new build, and that build is deployed to a passive instance. So we have an active passive setup where we deploy the build on the passive setup. We make sure that all the health checks are working, the passive setup is up and running. And once that is done, we make a switch. So we switch from the current active one to the passive one. And once the passive one becomes the active, we decommission the older instance. In this particular case, unfortunately, due to a process error, the active instance got decommissioned, though the active instance was live, and that what that is what brought the entire region down, and that led to the chain of events which we had to respond to.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great way to frame it up. And I like the idea that, we talk about this as a process error. We really do want to kind of be really careful when talking about human error or operator error. We want to frame things up as if an engineer triggered some unexpected outcome, well, that's obviously a signal that our system or our process actually didn't give them sufficient visibility into the state of the system, or that we lack those appropriate safeguards. So we definitely want to tread carefully around that kind of a contributing factor here. Pranav, I'm interested, could you help us to understand the dependency on Service Fabric? Because I've got some other engineers that would love to get in on this.
Absolutely. So as part of the Azure Notification Hub stack, and as we know, the service is the way in which Azure is built, that there are a few foundational services and there are mainstream services on which the entire stack stands. And Service Fabric is one of the most critical portions of how Azure functions. Azure Notification Hub has different components in it. So one is the compute component and the other one is the storage component. The storage component works with storage accounts and SQL databases. For the compute, Azure Notification Hub is completely dependent on Service Fabric, where the entire logic of sending notifications, keeping them in queues, and all the different parts of the stack are dependent on Service Fabric. As part of the incident, as soon as the incident occurred, the monitors which were there, they detected the instance very quickly. We were able to detect that, hey, within 12 minutes, our systems alerted us. There was automated monitoring. But when we tried to redeploy it in the same environment as part of fixing the issue, it did not work. And that is where I think the expertise of Service Fabric teams came in.
Super. Let's turn to one of these experts now. Gaurav, maybe I can turn to you. Could you talk to us a little bit about Service Fabric? What did you guys observe, and what did you investigate? How did you investigate and mitigate?
Yeah, this is interesting. As Pranav was describing when we came in, we definitely started to observe. Obviously, first we understood like what went through for us to build a sense of where we were. And how we should look at the problem. And we soon observed the structural, how should I say, disconnect in the system under the covers, because a service fabric like ANH and many other team services, they actually run on what I call as service fabric clusters. Think of them as like a set of VMs coming together to form a logical distributed system platform to run services at scale. And one of the core invariants here is that the VMs or wherever the compute is running is actually associated, hard associated with the notion of the cluster that we maintain in our service, which is called the Service Fabric RP. And as part of, as the recovery was being attempted, there was a disconnect that got introduced between these two systems, these two services. Like in the cluster, cluster is supposed to know I'm supposed to be attached to this specific cluster instance as the RP understands. But the recovery approaches led us to a point where some part of the cluster thought it was associated with the cluster in question, but the other part of the cluster thought that it was associated with a different version of the cluster. And part of this is because there was indeed a new cluster getting created as part of the mitigation approach. So some part of the structure was talking to that, and that actually was functioning okay. But the other part was looking for something that didn't exist. And that's kind of where the disconnect happened. And these are hard problems. Just to clarify, like, I mean, hindsight, everything is 2020 and you get to know. But when you're in the middle of it, they give me like 20,000 reasons why these observations look just the same, right? So based on our past experiences, we actually looked at various usual suspects, let's call it like that, whether they were UDWalk blockers, like in our system where there's some approvals and all getting stuck within Service Fabric itself or in other parts of the system. And it took us a bit of time also connecting through the diagnostics across both our service, so the RP, and the physical cluster that was there to start to build a sense of, oh, maybe it is neither of those. This is the case where, hey, we are looking actually at two different clusters, except that one of them doesn't exist. So there is a disconnect. But from the customer perspective, which in this case actually would be ANS team who are using Service Fabric, it would just seem like, hey, I'm doing the very usual thing. The cluster should just come back up because I just provisioned something that accidentally got removed. So why isn't it coming through? But under the covers, a lot of the invariants for the design got invalidated. And that's kind of where a lot of time got spent in terms of building this assessment and eliminating these suspects before we came to the clarity, okay, how we would proceed ahead with mitigation. That's kind of where we also plugged back to Pranav and his team to drive that. Yeah.
There was one piece, the mitigation piece fascinated me because we tried strategy A, which is, can we recover the old one? Should we just recover the old one? Should we continue with the new one?
Yeah.
And I think it was really interesting. I don't know who the best person is to walk us through.
I mean, I would lean to Pranav to talk to the overall approach. Like, there are physical aspects we can talk to, but they're pretty much about we can choose either to just remove the thing, or we can just try to resurrect what was deleted. But resurrection was really hard because some of these things are like permanently gone. So it's kind of about recreation at that point, less about resurrection. So
that's a great
Pranav,
point.
do you want to talk to how you approached it?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks, Gaurav, for that. I think what Gaurav mentioned was absolutely spot on. So from our viewpoint, we were thinking that, hey, we deleted the older one and we have redeployed it. Why isn't it coming up? And as he mentioned, that the invariants or the design principles which are required at that point of time are no longer valid because the cleanup should have happened. And there were a lot of different strategies which we were trying to apply. So at some point of time, we thought that, hey, since this particular instance of the cluster is not coming back up, let's do a cleanup of the passive instance, which was older present. We made sure that we cleaned up the entire networking artifacts. We cleaned up entire compute, entire storage, and there was nothing there. It was a clean slate. We tried the deployment, and fantastically, in one shot, the entire instance was brought back up. We then did our standard deployments. We did infrastructure, code, and all the required logging deployments. And with the help of that, I think we were able to mitigate the issue.
Got it. That's a great summary, Pranav. So I like that we explained that in the post-incident review. Hey, we considered doing this earlier, but ultimately that was what mitigated us here. So now that we understand, we've touched on some of the detection issues, our investigation and our mitigation, now's a great time for us to pivot over to talk about some of our learnings and repair items coming out of this. So Pranav, we'll stay with you initially. One of the big ones was Azure Notification Hubs, improving your service alerts and that kind of monitoring, and especially some of the pre-production hiccups. Would you help us to understand that a little better?
Yep. So again, this is a great learning experience for us. Our commitment is clear. We'll learn from this and we'll fix whatever was whatever went wrong. So the alerts were present, which is fantastic. We got to know about it, that hey, something is going wrong. We did drop the ball at a certain period of time. Our outage declaration mechanism was not to the point. There was an alert which was miscategorized as pre-production. It should have been a production alert. And because of that miscategorization, a lot of automated response mechanisms did not kick in. That did not allow the customers to know that there is an outage which was going on. This has been fixed currently, and we had made sure that for all the other alerts that is running. And as part of this, since the entire stack is very deep, we have identified multiple repair items from the top of the stack, from where Azure Notification Hub lives, to all the way down from Service Fabric, virtual machine scale set, so on and so forth. These include different things such as automated decommissioning protocols, just to make sure that this kind of operator or protocol errors don't happen. We need to have better outage declaration mechanisms. And very importantly, as Gaurav had also mentioned, our TSGs have to be much more robust. By taking a look at that, we were not able to understand, hey, what is going on? Why is the cluster not coming up? And at that point of time, we were losing every minute, and every minute counts when customers are impacted. So we have created step-by-step actionable TSGs, whom to contact, who are the right people who can debug this in a way that our customer impact is very low. So that all is in place.
So super. I appreciate kind of the improvements that we've made there. I want to bring in Jatinder as well. I quote Peter Carlin, one of our distinguished engineers, who said, a failure, the fact that we fail to imagine it means it's a human, everything is a human failure, because he said we fail to imagine it. The TSGs and the improvements that we're making on the Service Fabric side, on the Azure Notification Hub side, are we able to imagine scenarios that haven't happened and build TSGs for this? Like, it's a really tricky problem to solve.
Yeah. I think as part of this issue that we were investigating, one of the things that you realize is there are partial failures that are happening. They're not like the decom effort that was done. That was not complete decom. It's like a partial decom, which is something that you don't think about, because when you're doing a decom, you're doing a full decom versus a partial one, right? So the issue that we saw in our TSGs was that when the SFDRS got involved, they didn't realize this is a partial decom, and that detection between a full versus partial, that's not super clear to the DRIs. So that's where we are going to invest a lot more in the TSG side, that we as SFDRIs can actually go and understand this is a partial versus a full one. And then also we can build automation. So to give you context, like we have dashboards on the SF side. So SF control plane has visibility into what the SF cluster is doing, and we report status on it, like in our internal dashboards. And we have states and we have messaging and all that stuff that built in for helping the DRIs to go and understand what's going on. So there will be investments in those areas to go and automate some of that. Like we have best practice detectors kind of a thing, which does and goes and queries the clusters in the background and then detects if there's a mismatch, like the thing that Gaurav was explaining. There's a disconnect between the two systems. Can we detect it automatically and then improve the TSGs and the dashboards to help our DRIs to be able to say, oh, this is the issue, instead of like them spending time and going through the traces and figuring out like what's going on there.
Yeah, that's a great summary there, and I'll help to translate for people. DRI is our directly responsible individual. They're our on-call engineers from the different service teams. So that's great. You've touched on not just improving the troubleshooting guides, but also increasingly automating some of those recovery steps. I think, Pranav, you mentioned some automation here as well. Could you help us to understand how we're kind of removing humans from being involved in some of those active-passive transitions that you mentioned?
Absolutely, and thanks. I was just about to come to that as well. So as of now, the way in which ANH architecture is built, there are different active clusters and different passive clusters, and with asynchronous jobs which are used, and with shared storage being present, as of now, it's not possible for ANH to have an active passive instance running together, and we don't have the capability to automate it. And it's a design limitation. We are now taking a look at the entire stack. Hey, why is that the case? Because this is a risk, and we did fail one point at this point of time. In order to make sure that this does not happen again, we need to make sure that we have the capability to run these instances together in parallel. And once we are able to do that, automation of this will become very simple through our different offerings such as ARM templates. And at that point of time, there's no human or there's no operator which is required to do this. At the click of a button, all that steps which are taken, which are part of our SOP or standard operating procedure, we can execute them, and that will remove the need or for someone to be present there and do these steps. With help of this, I think instances like that can be minimized. So that is what we are currently working on.
So it's cool that following a major incident like this, you get a full review of all the things that you're doing and saying, okay, it's a good time to do some spring cleaning or some checking. Gaurav, maybe I can turn to you for this one. Your Service Fabric is working with a bunch of Azure services, because a lot of them take dependencies on Service Fabric, and you're weighing up the difference between you and the classics and managed Service Fabric. Can you walk us through how you're working with all the other Azure services?
Right. So to give some perspective, Service Fabric is at the foundation of Azure. When we bootstrap, it's one of the earliest systems that comes up, which in turn enables bringing up the foundational systems over which Azure's core control plane comes up. So whenever you are, for instance, creating VMs or you're creating networks and so forth, a good part of that control plane experience is they actually flow through that. And not just that, even beyond the control plane, I'm sure our customers are using services like SQL DB, SQL MI, Cosmos DB, and so forth. they all are built on Service Fabric. So it's very key and very foundational to Azure overall across the stack. So it was designed and built in a particular manner, and a Service Fabric cluster is enabled by two set of entities. One is our service, which Jitendra's team actually runs, which is pretty much like the service version of the runtime that runs on the compute nodes. And they work together to make sure like the functionality, the availability, resilience is there. But through this period, we have observed that, to your point about imagination, earlier point about imagination, like there are a lot of ways than the typical ones that the product has been getting used, the platform is getting used, both internally and externally to Microsoft. So situations like kind of what we are talking about today, we have been making investments into a newer stack of our service, which is actually called Service Fabric Managed Clusters. It actually is running a lot of both core workloads within and outside Microsoft. Yeah, it's already a GA entity, but we are trying to actually evolve it even further, such that some of such complex decom situations, disconnection situations, or should I even be bothered about managing how this cluster kind of works, gets totally abstracted away from the end customer or whoever is owning the cluster, right? So ANS shouldn't have to actually worry about it. It's either done or not done, or it's working or it's not working. So that's the kind of direction we are actually going, where both the platform in the core runtime, which we have on the compute side VMs, or we have in the service. So the experience is modernized. Plus, building upon some of the points Jitendra is making and Pranav is making, we are also investing a lot in improving our diagnostics, because one part of this incident was like, besides of course understanding where we were when we entered, quickly getting to the point where the system already is. So what are the diagnostics we need to embed? What are the things which we had to manually stitch this time are just going to be there, right? So it goes beyond just the TSGs, because now if the system is emitting all that metadata, then it is very easy for whoever is looking at the problem to come very quickly to a very narrow set of scope that they need to operate upon, rather than like filtering and through siphoning through. So that's kind of where we are working towards, and modernizing the stack for Azure and all our customers.
That's great. Yeah. That's cool to hear that first party and third party customers alike will be able to take it, or are already able to take advantage of this kind of abstracting away. We'll leave that problem up to Service Fabric, and we'll just focus on our services and how to make sure they're available. That's really cool. So a couple of quick questions for us to wrap up here. Pranav, I'd like to come back to you. One last question from your side. Look, we've talked a lot about our learnings at Microsoft and how the different teams are kind of leaning in and our repair items. Well, what should customers learn from this? I mean, when we're reading the post-incident review here, this was a single service. It was notification hubs impacted in a single region in East US. But what's our kind of best practices or guidance to customers around high availability or disaster recovery to try to weather a storm like this inevitably?
Thanks, David, for that question. I think you're absolutely spot on. There are issues which can happen in a single region, and generally the services should be resilient enough, and that is what, as part of our repair items, we are taking a look at. At the same time, a multi-region outage is very, very rare. We have not seen that happening. In order to make sure that customers don't feel that pain, or customers are isolated from that impact, it is equally important that resilience is built on customer side as well, because it is possible that things which are planned in a way don't go as per the plan. So both as a service team inside Microsoft and in partnership with our customers, it's our responsibility to ensure resilience so that the end users don't face the heat. During the outage, we did advise the customers to fail over to some other region. And as part of our guidance going forward, we do strongly recommend the customers to enable cross-region disaster recovery. The documentation for Azure Notification Hub does state that how do we have multiple regions deployed for Azure Notification Hubs? How can we have notification hub namespaces in more than one region? How do we import data? How do we export data? Building that before the house is on fire will certainly help customers in case if this situation ever occurs again. And it's not just about ANH, it's in general true for anything which we are planning to do in order to make sure we don't have an outage like this. It is imperative that there's BCDR which is built in for customers. That is our recommendation.
That's a great point, Pranav, and you're right. This is definitely not something specific to Notification Hub. We often are giving kind of multi-region or regional resilience guidance across so many different services today. So that's great. I'm glad we could touch on some customer learnings as well. I've saved my last question for my co-host Sammy here. Since Sammy runs our communications team, we always use our last question to say, how did we do during the outage? Were we able to keep customers up to date? And do we have any learnings from a communications perspective?
So, super question. There's a couple of things. Pranav touched on it where they detected the issue very promptly, but due to a config error, the communications team wasn't engaged. And just to let people know what happens, usually when any service in Azure says declares either automatically or through a human to say, yep, we're having an outage, this automatically brings in the communications team so we can tell our customers what's going on. We typically don't have thresholds of 1 or 2. We'll be engaged in everything. So in this case, because there was a delay in the communications team getting involved, there was a delay in getting notifications out to customers. It's something Pranav touched on as well that was really interesting is we'll try and avoid telling customers you should fail out, you shouldn't fail out. We know that customers are different. Some customers can endure an outage for 5 or 10 minutes only. Some customers can go 3 or 4 days or hours. It depends. And so what we try and tell customers is, hey, we think this is going to take X period of time. And the moment we were engaged, this was a little bit afterwards. I think we missed a few hours, but about 3 hours after we were engaged, we were able to tell customers, hey, this is going to be mitigated. They're working on bringing up the passive instance again, and they're reconstructing and resurrecting. And we think the ETAs are going to be 5 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours. And we were able to give customers progress then. We try really hard to avoid customers just saying you should fail out, because for different customers it means different things. And so we kept our customers up to date. One of the things as well is we know that it's so habitual for customers to know that there's an outage and they'll look at our public status page. And I'm going to use this opportunity to get up on my chair and say it's really imperative that customers configure those Azure Service Notification alerts, because if we can target customers and we can communicate directly to customers that are impacted, we always will do. And the reason we don't put it on the status page is because we don't want to create red herrings for customers where they think, my goodness, this could impact me and I should take action, when it really doesn't. So Azure Service Health is really the best place to go for targeted impact.
That's great to mention, because I know you're right. Some customers look at our public status page and say, wait, you're lying to me. There's an outage happening and it's not up on the status page. Especially for something like this, that's a single service in a single region, that's expected. And we've all got some learnings here, but it's really the big multi-region or multi-service outages where we have to use our public megaphone in addition to those targeted communications. So that's great to understand. Thank you for watching this Azure Incident Retrospective.
At the scale of which our cloud operates at, incidents are inevitable.
Just as Microsoft is always learning and improving, we hope our customers and partners can learn from these too, and provide a lot of reliability guidance through the Azure well-architected framework.
To ensure that you get posted incident reviews after an outage and invites to join these live stream Q&A sessions, please ensure that you have Azure Service Health Alerts set up.
We really focused on being as transparent as possible and showing up and being accountable after these major incidents.
Whether it's an outage, a security, or a privacy event, Microsoft is investing heavily in these events to ensure that we earn, maintain, and at times rebuild your trust. Thanks for joining us.